August 23, 1943, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The morning sun burned through jungle mist as Gunnery Sergeant Frank Moretti kicked the treads of what intelligence had called the most dangerous light tank in the Pacific. The Japanese Type 95 Hargo sat motionless in a muddy clearing, its hull penetrated by a single 37mm armor-piercing round that had entered the front glacis plate and exited through the engine compartment, killing all 3 crew members instantly. Moretti ran his calloused hand across the entry hole. The steel around the penetration had peeled back like aluminum foil, revealing interior plating so thin he could see daylight through the tears. 12 years of working Detroit steel mills had taught him to judge metal thickness by sight and touch. This wasn't armor. This was sheet metal, the kind his father had used to build chicken coops in Pennsylvania. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Behind him, Second Lieutenant James Chen examined the tank's specifications copied from a captured Japanese technical manual. Length 14 feet, width 6 feet 9 inches, height 7 feet 2 inches, combat weight 7.4 tons. The American M3 Stuart light tank weighed nearly double that at 12.5 tons, and Marines called the Stuart a death trap that couldn't stand up to anything heavier than machine gun fire. This Japanese tank had been terror incarnate across Manchuria and China, the mechanized spearhead of imperial expansion that had crushed Chinese resistance and established Japan's reputation for armored warfare superiority. Intelligence reports from Burma, Malaya, and the Philippines described the Type 95 as fast, maneuverable, and deadly. American tankers preparing for Pacific combat had been briefed to expect formidable opposition from Japanese armor, designed by engineers who had studied European tank warfare and incorporated the best elements of German and Soviet design. Philosophy. But, standing in the Guadalcanal mud, staring at a hull penetrated by the smallest anti-tank gun in the American arsenal, Moretti felt the same cold realization that had hit mechanics at Aberdeen Proving Ground when they examined the German Kubelwagen. The enemy's technological superiority existed primarily in American imagination rather than Japanese engineering reality. The Type 95 had arrived on Guadalcanal as part of the Ichiki Detachment's reinforcement convoy in late July 1943. Imperial Army commanders viewed the Hargo as their primary advantage against entrenched Marine positions around Henderson Field. Japanese doctrine emphasized speed and shock action, using light tanks to break through defensive lines before American forces could organize coordinated resistance. The tank's 37mm main gun and 2 7.7mm machine guns provided firepower that Japanese planners believed sufficient to overwhelm infantry positions lacking dedicated anti-tank capabilities. The Battle of the Tenaru River on August 21st had shattered those assumptions with mathematical brutality. Marine defensive positions included 6 M3 anti-tank guns, firing 37mm armor-piercing rounds at ranges between 300 and 800 yards. The engagement lasted 17 minutes. All 4 Japanese tanks committed to the assault were destroyed, with 3 burning furiously after ammunition fires consumed their interiors. The 4th tank, the one Moretti now examined, had died instantly when a single armor-piercing round achieved frontal penetration that should have been impossible against properly armored military vehicles. Corporal Tommy Walsh approached carrying a ball-peen hammer and measuring calipers borrowed from the division motor pool. The 22-year-old mechanic from Boston had spent 2 years at General Motors before enlistment, learning to work with steel plate and structural components that met civilian automotive standards. His engineering instincts rebelled against what he saw in the Hargo's construction. "Check the armor thickness," Moretti ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived Tulagi and knew that understanding enemy equipment meant understanding how to kill it efficiently. Walsh positioned his calipers against the front glacis plate, where the 37mm round had achieved penetration. The measurement made him pause and recalibrate his instrument to confirm the reading. 12mm, he announced, disbelief evident in his tone. Front armor is 12mm. That's less than half an inch. My dad's tractor shed has thicker walls than this. The American M3 Stuart, considered barely adequate for combat operations, carried 38 millimeters of frontal armor. The German Panzer IV mounted 50 millimeters of face-hardened steel. Even the obsolete French Renault FT-17 from the previous war had carried 16 millimeters of protection. The Type 95's armor represented a design philosophy that prioritized mobility and fuel efficiency over crew survivability, a trade-off that made perfect sense for colonial warfare against opponents lacking modern anti-tank weapons, but proved catastrophically inadequate against American firepower. Lieutenant Chen climbed onto the tank's hull, his boots scraping against rough cast steel that showed visible imperfections from the manufacturing process. The turret hatch opened with surprising ease, revealing an interior so cramped that Chen struggled to maneuver his 5'8" frame through the opening. Inside, the tank's operational reality became immediately apparent. 3 men had operated this vehicle in a space smaller than a telephone booth, surrounded by ammunition, fuel, and mechanical components, with no separation or protection between crew positions and explosive materials. The commander's position offered a narrow vision slit and a small periscope that provided maybe 60 degrees of forward visibility. No cupola, no independent observation devices, no way to maintain situational awareness without exposing himself through the open hatch. The gunner sat crouched to the commander's left, operating a manual traverse system that required physical strength to rotate the turret. The driver, positioned in the hull front, had visibility through a single narrow slit that could be closed with an armored shutter, leaving him effectively blind during combat. "This is suicide engineering," Chen called down to Moretti. "The crew can't see, can't communicate effectively, and they're sitting on top of their own ammunition with armor that won't stop rifle grenades. No wonder they fight so desperately. They know they're dead the moment someone shoots back with real weapons." The August heat transformed the tank's interior into a suffocating oven that stank of death, cordite, and mechanical fluids. Chen examined the main gun's breech mechanism, noting Japanese characters stamped into the metal that identified the weapon as a Type 94 37mm tank gun. The ammunition rack held a mixture of armor-piercing and high-explosive rounds, each carefully stenciled with lot numbers and manufacturing dates that revealed the Japanese military's meticulous record-keeping, even in mass-produced ammunition. The 37mm armor-piercing round, according to captured technical specifications, could penetrate 25mm of armor at 500 meters, sufficient to defeat Chinese tanks and fortifications, marginally effective against early war European light armor, but completely inadequate against American M3 Stuarts, much less the M4 Shermans beginning to arrive in theater. Japanese tank designers had optimized their weapons for the Manchurian conflict and Chinese theater operations, where opposition consisted primarily of infantry and obsolete equipment. The engine compartment revealed the Type 95's mechanical heart, a Mitsubishi air-cooled diesel producing 120 horsepower. Moretti crawled underneath the hull, ignoring the mud and the smell, to examine the running gear and suspension system. The tank used a bell crank scissors suspension with 2 bogies per side, a simple and reliable system that minimized maintenance requirements. The treads showed surprisingly good design, with grousser plates that provided excellent traction in mud and loose soil. The drivetrain's mechanical simplicity impressed Moretti, despite the tank's obvious combat inadequacies. This was engineering designed for mass production and field maintenance by crews with limited technical training. Every component could be accessed and repaired without specialized tools. The air-cooled engine eliminated the complexity of liquid cooling systems that plagued American tanks in tropical conditions. The manual traverse and elevation systems required no hydraulics or electrical power that could fail under combat damage. Japanese engineers had created a tank optimized for Imperial Army doctrine, infantry support in colonial warfare against technologically inferior opponents, operating with minimal logistical support across primitive infrastructure. The Type 95 excelled at that mission, providing mobile firepower that overwhelmed Chinese and Southeast Asian resistance throughout the 1930s. But the Pacific War had changed the requirements. American forces brought modern anti-tank weapons, coordinated combined arms tactics, and industrial production capacity that rendered Japanese light tank doctrine obsolete before the war began. By mid-morning, a small crowd of Marines had gathered around the captured Hago, drawn by curiosity about the enemy armor they had been taught to fear. Staff Sergeant Bill Morrison arrived carrying a clipboard and camera, assigned by Division Intelligence to document the tank's capabilities for training purposes. His engineering background from MIT provided the technical framework needed to translate Japanese design choices into meaningful analysis for American tactical planning. Morrison began a systematic photographic survey, capturing details that would soon appear in tactical bulletins distributed throughout the Pacific Theater. The glacis plate penetration received particular attention, with Morrison using a ruler to document the hole diameter and penetration angle. The photographs would prove that American 37mm anti-tank guns could achieve frontal kills at ranges exceeding 800 yards, information that would fundamentally alter Marine defensive planning for subsequent operations. The turret armor measurements revealed even thinner protection than the hull. Walsh's calipers showed just 10 millimeters of steel, protecting the turret sides and rear. A .50 caliber machine gun could penetrate that thickness at close range. Even standard .30-06 armor-piercing rifle ammunition might achieve penetration under optimal conditions. The tank's crew had been operating a vehicle that offered barely more protection than an armored car while facing weapons designed to defeat substantially heavier armor. Chen discovered the radio installation, or rather the lack thereof. The Type 95 carried no wireless communication equipment, relying instead on signal flags and hand signals for coordination with infantry and other tanks. This explained the rigid, inflexible Japanese tank tactics that Marine defenders had observed during the Tenaru assault. Without radio communication, Japanese armor could not adapt to changing battlefield conditions or coordinate with supporting units beyond visual range. American tank doctrine emphasized radio communication as fundamental to armored warfare. Every M3 Stuart carried an SCR 508 radio set, providing voice communication between tanks and with infantry support. The Germans had proven radio's value in blitzkrieg operations across Europe. Even the Soviets, despite their technological limitations, equipped tank platoon leaders with radio gear. Japanese tank crews fought essentially deaf and mute, unable to share intelligence or request support beyond shouting distance. Morrison's technical analysis revealed the Type 95's development history through examination of construction details and component specifications. The tank had entered service in 1935, designed specifically for the Manchurian conflict, where speed and reliability mattered more than armor protection. Japanese engineers had studied the British Vickers 6-ton tank and incorporated elements of Soviet 26 design philosophy, creating a vehicle optimized for cavalry-style exploitation operations across open terrain. The Hago's combat weight of 7.4 tons reflected careful optimization for Japanese logistics. Imperial Army bridge equipment could handle loads up to 8 tons, making the Type 95 compatible with existing transportation infrastructure throughout Asia. The tank's narrow width allowed rail transport on Japanese standard-gauge rolling stock without specialized loading equipment. Every design choice reflected constraints imposed by Japan's limited industrial capacity and primitive transportation network. But those same design choices that made the Type 95 perfect for Asian colonial warfare rendered it obsolete for Pacific Island combat against American forces. The tank's 12mm armor, adequate against Chinese rifles and improvised anti-tank weapons, became a fatal liability when facing American 37mm anti-tank guns, 57mm weapons arriving with newer divisions, and the 75mm guns mounted on M4 Sherman tanks beginning to supplement Stuart light tanks throughout the theater. Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Fuller arrived at the examination site shortly before noon. His legendary intensity focused on understanding Japanese capabilities through direct observation rather than intelligence reports written by staff officers who had never seen combat. Fuller had commanded 1st Battalion, 7th Marines during the Tenaru battle and wanted to understand exactly why Japanese armor had failed so catastrophically against his defensive positions. Moretti briefed the colonel with the directness that Fuller appreciated. "Sir, this tank's armor won't stop anything bigger than rifle bullets. Our 37s punch through the front plate like it's cardboard. The sides and rear are even thinner. And the crew compartment is so cramped they can barely operate the vehicle, much less fight effectively when they're getting shot at." Fuller circled the Hargo slowly, his expression revealing the mental calculations of someone who understood that every enemy weakness represented an American advantage that could save Marine lives in future operations. The Japanese tank crews were brave men, fighting with inadequate equipment against superior firepower. Understanding their vulnerabilities meant exploiting them ruthlessly, the fundamental arithmetic of warfare where sentiment had no place in tactical planning. "Show me the ammunition storage," Fuller ordered. Chen guided him to the hull interior where ready ammunition racks positioned high explosive and armor-piercing rounds within easy reach of the gunner. Fuller immediately recognized the configuration's vulnerability. One penetrating hit anywhere near these racks, and the whole tank becomes a bomb. No wonder they burned so fast at the Tenaru. The afternoon examination focused on the Type 95's mobility characteristics and mechanical reliability. Morrison supervised a test of the tank's surviving systems, with Walsh coaxing the Mitsubishi diesel engine to life after replacing fuel lines severed by the fatal armor-piercing round. The engine caught on the third attempt, settling into a rough idle that spoke of combat damage but demonstrated the design's fundamental mechanical robustness. With Chen at the controls, the Hargo lurched forward through Guadalcanal's mud with surprising agility. The tank's low ground pressure and well-designed tracks provided excellent mobility in conditions that would bog down heavier vehicles. Maximum road speed approached 28 miles per hour, faster than the Stuart's 22-mile-per-hour pace. The bell crank suspension absorbed terrain irregularities smoothly, creating a stable gun platform even across rough ground. The mobility demonstration revealed why Japanese commanders valued the Type 95, despite its obvious combat limitations. In the colonial warfare for which it was designed, speed and reliability mattered more than armor protection. The Hargo could keep pace with infantry advances, cross primitive bridges, operate with minimal maintenance, and provide mobile firepower against opponents lacking modern anti-tank capabilities. Those advantages had made it the backbone of Japanese armored forces throughout the 1930s, but the Pacific War's operational environment negated every mobility advantage the Type 95 possessed. Island warfare restricted maneuver options, forcing tanks into head-on assaults against prepared defensive positions. Dense jungle limited visibility and fields of fire to ranges where armor thickness became critical. American anti-tank weapons deployed in depth created killing zones where Japanese tanks had to advance across open ground against overwatching guns positioned for maximum effectiveness. Walsh shut down the engine after 15 minutes of operation, having documented the tank's mechanical characteristics sufficiently for intelligence purposes. The Hargo sat smoking slightly, its engine compartment venting heat into Guadalcanal's humid air. Morrison had captured dozens of photographs showing construction details, crew positions, ammunition storage, and combat damage. The technical intelligence would soon travel to Washington, where analysts would incorporate Japanese armor specifications into tactical training programs and equipment development planning. As the examination concluded, Moretti found himself thinking about the Japanese tank crews who had died in these thin-skinned vehicles. Knowing their armor couldn't protect them, but attacking anyway because doctrine and orders demanded it. The Type 95 represented more than inferior engineering. It embodied an entire military philosophy, built on assumptions that no longer matched battlefield reality, assumptions that American industrial power and firepower superiority had rendered obsolete before the first shots were fired. The comparison testing began on August 24th, when Division Headquarters authorized bringing an M3 Stuart light tank to the examination site for direct side-by-side evaluation. The Stuart, officially designated Light Tank M3, represented American light armor doctrine built on entirely different design principles than Japanese engineering philosophy. Captain Richard Hayes supervised the comparative analysis, his 3 years as an armor officer at Fort Knox providing the technical background necessary to translate observed differences into meaningful tactical intelligence. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The two tanks sat 20 yards apart in the clearing, creating a stark visual contrast that revealed fundamental differences in design philosophy before any measurements were taken. The M3 Stuart weighed 12.5 tons compared to the Type 95's 7.4 tons, nearly 70% heavier despite serving the same doctrinal role as light reconnaissance and infantry support armor. That weight difference told the entire story of American versus Japanese approaches to armored warfare. Hayes directed his team to conduct systematic measurements of both vehicles, documenting armor thickness, weapons specifications, mobility characteristics, and crew accommodations. The data would travel to Washington, where planners were already developing next-generation armor to replace the Stuart with more capable designs. Understanding Japanese armor capabilities provided context for determining how much American superiority was actually necessary versus how much represented engineering excess that added cost and complexity without proportional tactical benefit. Walsh began with direct armor thickness comparisons, using his calipers to measure protection at identical points on both vehicles. The M3 Stuart's front glacis plate measured 38 mm, more than 3 times the Type 95's 12 mm protection. Side armor on the Stuart measured 28 mm compared to the Hargo's 10 mm. Even the Stuart's thinnest armor sections exceeded the Japanese tank's maximum protection by significant margins. But armor thickness represented only part of the protection equation. Hayes examined the steel quality and manufacturing techniques, discovering that American armor plate used face-hardened steel that provided ballistic protection exceeding its nominal thickness. The Stuart's 38 mm front plate offered protection equivalent to perhaps 50 mm of mild steel through hardening processes that increased resistance to armor-piercing projectiles. Japanese armor plate lacked comparable hardening, making the actual protection disparity even greater than simple thickness measurements suggested. Chen calculated the armor weight percentages for both vehicles, revealing how each design balanced protection against mobility and mechanical reliability. The Stuart devoted approximately 31% of its combat weight to armor protection compared to the Type 95's 18%. American designers had accepted the weight penalty of heavy armor as necessary for crew survivability, while Japanese engineers prioritized mobility and fuel efficiency over protection. The weapons comparison demonstrated American firepower superiority across every measurable parameter. The Stuart's 37 mm M6 main gun fired the same caliber ammunition as the Type 95's Type 94 gun, but American ammunition achieved higher muzzle velocities and better armor penetration through superior propellant chemistry and metallurgy. More significantly, the Stuart carried 300 rounds of 37 mm ammunition compared to the Hargo's 120 rounds, providing American crews with sustained firepower for extended engagements. The Stuart's secondary armament consisted of 5.30 caliber Browning machine guns positioned to provide comprehensive defensive coverage against infantry assault. The Type 95 carried only 2 7.7 mm machine guns with limited ammunition capacity and restricted fields of fire. American tanks could suppress enemy infantry while maneuvering, creating tactical flexibility that Japanese armor lacked due to inadequate secondary weapons. Morrison documented the crew accommodation differences that would prove critical during sustained combat operations. The Stuart's interior, though still cramped by civilian standards, provided vastly better working conditions than the Hargo's claustrophobic crew compartment. American tankers could operate their vehicle for extended periods without the extreme physical and mental fatigue that afflicted Japanese crews, fighting in spaces barely large enough to accommodate their bodies and equipment. The vision systems comparison revealed technological advantages that translated directly into battlefield effectiveness. The Stuart featured a rotating commander's cupola with vision blocks, providing 360-degree observation capability. The gunner had a telescopic sight and periscope for target acquisition and engagement. The driver operated with multiple vision devices that maintained situational awareness even when buttoned up under fire. Japanese tank crews fought with vision systems that would have been considered inadequate on civilian vehicles, much less military armor operating in combat conditions. Hayes supervised mobility testing that compared acceleration, top speed, and cross-country performance between the two designs. The Stuart's Continental radial engine produced 250 horsepower compared to the Type 95's 120 horsepower, providing the American tank with superior acceleration despite its greater weight. Road speed favored the lighter Japanese tank at 28 miles per hour versus the Stuart's 22, but combat operations rarely allowed sustained high-speed movement where that advantage could be exploited. The cross-country performance testing revealed surprising results that challenged assumptions about weight and mobility relationships. The Stuart's tracks, suspension, and ground pressure distribution provided excellent off-road performance, despite weighing nearly double the Japanese tank. The Hargo's lighter weight should have given it advantage in soft soil and mud, but the Stuart's superior track design and more powerful engine compensated effectively. Neither tank showed decisive cross-country mobility advantage in the conditions typical of Pacific Island warfare. Fuel efficiency represented one clear advantage for Japanese design philosophy. The Type 95 achieved approximately 160 miles operational range on internal fuel compared to the Stuart's 70 miles. The air-cooled diesel engine consumed fuel more efficiently than the Stuart's gasoline radial, and the lighter overall weight reduced fuel consumption per mile traveled. For Imperial Army operations across China's vast distances with primitive logistics networks that range, advantage justified the protection and firepower compromises necessary to achieve it. But Pacific Island warfare negated range advantages almost completely. Engagement distances measured in yards rather than miles, with most combat occurring within a few thousand yards of amphibious landing beaches. Japanese tanks never exploited their superior range because the operational environment provided no opportunity for extended movement. American armor operated with robust logistics support that could deliver fuel anywhere it was needed, making the Stuart's shorter range tactically irrelevant. The reliability testing extended over 5 days as mechanics operated both tanks under simulated combat conditions to evaluate mechanical durability and maintenance requirements. The Type 95's Mitsubishi diesel demonstrated impressive reliability, running continuously for 12 hours without mechanical failure or performance degradation. The air-cooled design eliminated coolant system, failures that plagued liquid-cooled engines in tropical conditions, and the simple mechanical systems required minimal maintenance to sustain operations. The Stuart's Continental radial engine showed comparable reliability, despite its greater complexity and higher power output. American manufacturing quality and robust engineering margins created mechanical systems that could absorb abuse and neglect while continuing to function. Where Japanese reliability came from design simplicity, American reliability emerged from manufacturing excellence and engineering conservatism that built durability into every component. Walsh conducted maintenance time studies comparing routine service requirements for both vehicles. The Type 95 required approximately 4 hours of daily maintenance under combat conditions, primarily focused on track adjustment, fuel system service, and weapons cleaning. The Stuart demanded roughly 6 hours of daily maintenance due to its more complex systems and greater number of components requiring regular attention. But the maintenance time comparison revealed less than the complete logistical picture. American armor operated with comprehensive spare parts support, specialized tools, and trained mechanics at multiple echelons from company to theatre level. Japanese armor operated with minimal logistics infrastructure, often lacking basic spare parts and requiring improvised repairs using materials never intended for combat vehicle maintenance. The Type 95's maintenance simplicity represented necessity rather than preference, designing for operations where proper support would be unavailable. The ammunition expenditure analysis provided critical intelligence about sustained combat effectiveness. The Stuart carried 300 rounds of 37mm ammunition and over 5,000 rounds of 30 caliber machine gun ammunition, sufficient for extended engagements lasting multiple hours. The Type 95's ammunition load of 120 main gun rounds and 3,000 machine gun rounds limited sustained combat operations to much shorter durations before requiring resupply. Chen calculated ammunition expenditure rates under various combat scenarios, determining that Stuart crews could maintain continuous fire for approximately 25 minutes compared to the Hargo's 12 minutes before exhausting ready ammunition. In fluid combat conditions, where resupply might be delayed or impossible, that ammunition capacity difference translated directly into sustained combat effectiveness and tactical flexibility. The radio communication analysis revealed perhaps the most significant tactical advantage American armor possessed over Japanese designs. Every M3 Stuart carried an SCR 508 radio, providing voice communication between tanks and with infantry support elements. Tank platoons could coordinate maneuvers, share intelligence, and request support without relying on visual signals or couriers. The radio gave American armor commanders tactical flexibility that transformed individual tanks into coordinated combat systems, capable of adapting to changing battlefield conditions. The Type 95's complete absence of radio communication equipment left Japanese tank crews fighting deaf and mute, unable to coordinate beyond visual range or adapt tactics based on real-time intelligence. Morrison witnessed this limitation's tactical impact during the Tenaru River engagement, when Japanese tanks continued attacking pre-planned objectives even after their supporting infantry had been destroyed. Without radios, the tank crews had no way to receive updated orders or coordinate with surviving units, forcing them to execute original attack plans despite changed circumstances that made those plans suicidal. Hayes concluded the comparative analysis with recommendations that would influence American armor development for the remainder of the Pacific War. Japanese light tanks pose minimal threat to properly equipped Marine units, he wrote in his formal assessment. American armor and anti-tank weapons possess decisive superiority in protection, firepower, and tactical flexibility. The primary Japanese advantages in fuel efficiency and mechanical simplicity provide negligible tactical benefit in Pacific Island warfare conditions. The recommendations emphasized that American forces should exploit their material advantages through aggressive tactics that leveraged superior firepower and protection. Japanese tanks should be engaged at maximum range where American weapons could reliably penetrate while remaining immune to Japanese return fire. Defensive positions should incorporate anti-tank guns in depth, creating overlapping fields of fire that ensured Japanese armor faced multiple threats simultaneously, regardless of approach direction. The evening briefing at division headquarters synthesized the day's findings into actionable intelligence that would shape Marine Corps anti-tank doctrine throughout the Pacific campaign. Colonel Fuller presented the analysis to regimental and battalion commanders, who would translate technical observations into tactical applications that saved lives and won battles. The Type 95 Hargo is the primary Japanese light tank we'll face in future operations, Fuller began, his voice carrying the authority of combat experience and documented observation. It's fast, reliable, and well-suited for the role Japanese doctrine assigns it, but it has critical vulnerabilities we can exploit systematically. Morrison displayed his photographs on a makeshift screen, each image annotated with measurements and technical specifications that transformed subjective impressions into objective data. The armor analysis provoked immediate discussion among officers who had been preparing for more formidable opposition. Front armor is 12 mm, barely half an inch of steel. Morrison, explained. Side and rear armor is 10 millimeters. Our 37 millimeter anti-tank guns will penetrate at any combat range. 57 millimeter weapons will punch through like tissue paper. Even 50 caliber armor-piercing ammunition can achieve penetration against side and rear armor at close range. The tactical implications began reshaping defensive planning immediately. Marine battalions equipped with M3 anti-tank guns received guidance to position weapons for frontal shots at maximum engagement range, typically 600 to 800 yards. The lightweight 37 millimeter guns could be manhandled into positions that provided overlapping fields of fire, creating kill zones where Japanese tanks would face multiple guns simultaneously, regardless of their approach direction. Chen briefed the Hago's mobility characteristics, emphasizing that Japanese armor could maneuver faster than American Stuart tanks and possessed superior cross-country performance in jungle and mud. This dictates how we position anti-tank guns, Chen explained. The Japanese will try to close quickly and use their speed to complicate our targeting. We need positions that force them to advance across open ground, under observation from multiple firing positions. The lack of radio communication in Japanese tanks provided additional tactical advantage for marine defenders. Without wireless coordination, Japanese armor would rely on rigid, pre-planned attacks that couldn't adapt to changing battlefield conditions. Marine defenders who disrupted initial assault formations could expect Japanese tanks to continue executing their original plan rather than improvising responses to unexpected resistance. Fuller emphasized the psychological dimension of the intelligence windfall. Marines who had been taught to fear Japanese armor now understood their anti-tank weapons could reliably defeat the most common enemy tank at any combat range. That confidence would prove as important as the technical specifications themselves, transforming defensive attitudes from anxiety about Japanese armor superiority to professional assessment of target vulnerabilities. The ammunition storage vulnerability received particular attention in tactical guidance. Japanese tanks carried their ready ammunition in exposed racks with no protective separation between explosive projectiles and crew compartment. Any penetrating hit had high probability of igniting ammunition fires that consumed the tank and killed the crew within seconds. This meant Marine anti-tank gunners didn't need to achieve precise shot placement. Any hit that penetrated the armor would likely prove catastrophic. By nightfall, mimeograph machines at division headquarters were producing tactical bulletins for distribution to every Marine unit on Guadalcanal. The documents carried detailed specifications of Type 95 capabilities and vulnerabilities, accompanied by Morrison's photographs showing armor, thickness, interior layout, and combat damage characteristics. Within 72 hours, copies would reach Marine divisions throughout the Pacific Theater, fundamentally altering American perceptions of Japanese armored threat. The August 24th morning found Moretti supervising the Type 95's transport to Division Motor Pool for detailed mechanical disassembly. The captured tank would be systematically dismantled, with every component examined and documented to create comprehensive technical intelligence that went beyond battlefield observations into engineering analysis of Japanese industrial capabilities and design philosophy. Master Sergeant Robert Anderson, the division's senior automotive mechanic with 15 years of Army experience, led the disassembly team. His expertise with American armor provided comparative context for evaluating Japanese engineering choices. The Hago represented his first opportunity to examine enemy armor from the inside out rather than through battlefield wreckage and intelligence photographs. The engine removal required 4 hours of careful work, extracting the Mitsubishi air-cooled diesel from its rear-mounted compartment while preserving all connections and support systems for subsequent examination. The power plant emerged as a surprisingly sophisticated piece of machinery, far more advanced than the crude equipment American mechanics had expected from Japanese manufacturing. Anderson examined the engine with professional appreciation for engineering elegance that transcended national origin. "This is good work," he announced to his team. "The air cooling system is well designed for tropical operations. No radiators to leak, no coolant to boil off, no water pumps to fail. They solved the cooling problem differently than we did, but their solution works effectively for the operational environment. The Mitsubishi diesel displaced 21.7 litres, producing 120 horsepower at 1,800 revolutions per minute. Specific output was modest by American standards, but the engine achieved remarkable fuel efficiency and reliability through conservative design parameters. Japanese engineers had prioritized operational range and maintenance simplicity over maximum power output, creating an engine that could operate for extended periods with minimal service support. Walsh disassembled the transmission and final drive systems, finding mechanical components that reflected careful attention to manufacturing tolerances and material quality. The gearbox provided 4 forward speeds and 1 reverse, with synchromesh on 2nd through 4th gears. Shift quality would have been smooth and positive under normal operation, though combat stress and rough handling by inexperienced crews would accelerate wear and create maintenance problems. The transmission revealed Japan's industrial limitations through subtle details that American mechanics trained on Detroit production equipment immediately recognized. Gear teeth showed hand-finishing marks where American manufacturers would use precision grinding. Bearing surfaces displayed slight irregularities that suggested limited access to high-quality steel alloys. The castings, though functionally adequate, lacked the consistent quality that mass production automation provided in American factories. Chen conducted dimensional analysis of critical components, measuring tolerances, and comparing Japanese specifications against American military standards. His findings confirmed what battlefield performance had suggested. The Type 95 represented careful engineering, executed with limited industrial capabilities. Japanese manufacturers achieved functional reliability through conservative design margins and hand-fitting of components, rather than through precision mass production techniques. The armor plate analysis provided most damning evidence of Japanese industrial constraints. Metallurgical examination of the hull steel revealed composition and hardening characteristics that fell short of contemporary armor specifications. The 12mm front plate used mild steel with minimal face hardening, providing ballistic protection equivalent to perhaps 8mm of properly hardened armor plate. Morrison arranged to ship sample armor plates to Aberdeen Proving Ground for comprehensive ballistic testing that would quantify the Type 95's actual protective values against various American weapons. The preliminary field assessment suggested that Japanese armor plate might be vulnerable to weapons even lighter than the 37mm anti-tank gun, potentially including heavy machine guns, firing armor-piercing ammunition at close range. The turret mechanism examination revealed the Hargo's most significant combat limitation beyond thin armor. The manual traverse system required the gunner to physically rotate the turret using a hand crank, a slow and exhausting process that left Japanese tanks vulnerable during rapid engagement sequences. American Stuart tanks used powered traverse systems that allowed gunners to track moving targets continuously while maintaining situational awareness. Walsh timed the manual traverse speed at approximately 10 degrees per second under ideal conditions, significantly slower than the Stuart's 25 degree per second powered rotation. In combat, with the turret mechanism binding from dirt, damage, or crew fatigue, traverse speed would degrade further. Japanese gunners needed several seconds to slew the turret onto new targets, creating vulnerability windows that American tank crews could exploit by rapid maneuver and position changes. The vision system analysis revealed another critical Japanese disadvantage. The tank commander's cupola provided approximately 60 degrees of forward visibility through a narrow periscope and vision slit. No rotating cupola, no independent observation devices, no way to maintain comprehensive situational awareness without exposing himself through the open hatch during combat operations. American Stuart tanks featured rotating cupolas with vision blocks, providing 360-degree observation capability. Tank commanders could maintain complete situational awareness while remaining protected inside the vehicle. This seemingly minor equipment difference translated into enormous tactical advantage, allowing American armor to detect threats earlier, coordinate more effectively, and maintain better command and control during fluid combat operations. Anderson's final assessment synthesized 3 days of detailed mechanical examination into comprehensive understanding of Japanese light tank capabilities and limitations. The Type 95 represents competent engineering executed with limited resources, he concluded. Japanese designers created a reliable, maintainable vehicle optimized for colonial warfare and infantry support. But they made fundamental compromises that render it obsolete against modern anti-tank weapons and American armor. The mobility advantages that made the Ha-Go effective in Manchuria and China became irrelevant in Pacific Island warfare, where maneuver options were constrained and engagement ranges were short. The armor protection adequate against Chinese opposition proved catastrophically insufficient against American firepower. The mechanical simplicity that enabled operations with minimal logistics support couldn't compensate for tactical vulnerabilities created by thin armor, manual turret traverse, and absent radio communication. By early September 1943, technical intelligence derived from the captured Type 95 had reached Marine units throughout the Pacific Theater and Army divisions preparing for subsequent operations. The detailed specifications and tactical guidance transformed American perceptions of Japanese armored threat from unknown danger to well-understood vulnerability that could be systematically exploited through proper weapon employment and defensive planning. The psychological impact proved as significant as the tactical intelligence. American troops who had been conditioned to expect formidable opposition from Japanese armor discovered their enemy's tanks were technologically inferior to American light armor, itself considered barely adequate for modern combat. This revelation extended beyond armor capabilities into broader questions about Japanese military technological superiority and the foundations of imperial combat effectiveness. Marine battalions receiving tactical bulletins on Type 95 vulnerabilities began requesting additional 37mm anti-tank guns to exploit the documented armor penetration capabilities. Division commanders allocated weapons to units expecting Japanese armor opposition, creating defensive networks where every avenue of approach came under observation from multiple anti-tank guns positioned for overlapping fields of fire. The armor-piercing ammunition allocation increased throughout Marine divisions, as supply officers recognized that standard 37mm AP rounds would reliably defeat Japanese light armor at any combat range. Previous ammunition mix guidance had assumed Marine anti-tank guns would face more heavily armored opposition, requiring careful shot placement and multiple hits for effective kills. The Type 95's thin armor meant individual rounds would achieve catastrophic kills, simplifying the anti-tank engagement problem considerably. Training programs at Marine combat schools incorporated the Type 95 intelligence into anti-tank instruction that emphasized rapid target engagement and aggressive positioning. Student gunners learned that Japanese light tanks presented relatively easy targets once proper engagement techniques were mastered. The training produced anti-tank crews who approached Japanese armor with professional confidence, rather than the anxiety that had characterized earlier encounters with unknown enemy capabilities. The September offensives on New Georgia and Bougainville provided first large-scale tests of tactics developed from the Type 95 analysis. Marine anti-tank gunners positioned according to doctrine derived from Guadalcanal intelligence engaged Japanese Ha-Go tanks at ranges between 400 and 1,000 yards, achieving kill ratios that validated the technical assessments and tactical guidance. At Tarawa in November 1943, Marines faced Type 95 tanks employed in static defensive positions, supporting fortified positions around the airfield. The engagement environment differed substantially from Guadalcanal's mobile warfare, but the fundamental vulnerability remained constant. Japanese armor couldn't withstand American anti-tank weapons regardless of tactical employment. The amphibious assault's initial phases saw Japanese tanks destroyed by naval gunfire and airstrikes before they could meaningfully engage landing forces. Those Ha-Go tanks that survived preliminary bombardment were systematically eliminated by Marine anti-tank guns and bazookas as the advance moved inland. The armor protection that had dominated Chinese battlefields in the 1930s proved useless against American firepower delivered in the concentrated fury of amphibious operations. By January 1944, American intelligence had identified and analyzed all major Japanese tank types employed throughout the Pacific theater. The Type 95 remained the most common, but newer designs, including the Type 97 Chiha medium tank, had appeared in Burma and the Philippines. Each vehicle showed similar patterns of thin armor, manual systems, and design philosophies optimized for colonial warfare rather than conflict against modern military forces. The strategic implications extended beyond tactical engagements into broader understanding of Japanese military-industrial capabilities. American analysts recognized that Japanese armor development had stagnated since the mid-1930s, with newer designs representing evolutionary improvements rather than fundamental advances in protection, firepower, or mobility. This stood in stark contrast to American armor development, where M4 Sherman medium tanks were rapidly replacing M3 Stuarts, providing substantial improvements in every performance category. The September 1943 intelligence summary distributed throughout Pacific Theater commands included comprehensive Type 95 analysis, accompanied by tactical guidance for engaging Japanese armor effectively. The document represented the culmination of technical examination, battlefield observation, and comparative analysis conducted over 4 weeks on Guadalcanal. Every Marine and Army unit preparing for subsequent operations received copies highlighting the Hargo's vulnerabilities and optimal engagement techniques. Major General Alexander Vandergrift, commanding 1st Marine Division, recognized the intelligence windfall's significance immediately. For 6 months, his Marines had operated with incomplete information about Japanese armor capabilities, forcing conservative defensive planning that assumed enemy tanks posed serious threats requiring dedicated anti-tank resources. The Type 95 analysis allowed more aggressive tactics that exploited documented vulnerabilities rather than defending against imagined capabilities. The tactical bulletins emphasized that Japanese armor should be engaged at maximum effective range using direct-fire anti-tank weapons positioned to achieve frontal or flank shots. The 37mm M3 anti-tank gun could reliably penetrate Type 95 armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, allowing Marine gunners to destroy Japanese tanks before they could close to effective combat range. Even the bazooka, primarily designed for close-range anti-tank work, could defeat Hargo armor from any aspect at ranges up to 300 yards. Infantry units received guidance emphasizing that Japanese tanks were vulnerable to weapons not traditionally considered anti-tank capable. The 50 caliber M2 heavy machine gun, firing armor-piercing ammunition, could penetrate Type 95 side and rear armor at ranges under 400 yards. Even the 30 caliber machine gun might achieve penetration against the thinnest armor sections at close range, though this was not recommended as a primary engagement technique. The grenades and demolition charges carried by assault engineers could disable or destroy Japanese tanks when infantry could approach close enough for emplacement. The Type 95's thin armor provided minimal protection against explosive charges placed directly against hull or turret surfaces. Marine assault teams received training in tank hunting techniques that exploited the Hargo's lack of defensive machine gun coverage and limited vision systems. The psychological dimension of the intelligence transformation proved as important as tactical guidance. Marines who had been conditioned to fear Japanese armor now understood their enemy's tanks represented manageable threats that could be defeated through proper technique and aggressive tactics. That confidence translated into more effective defensive planning and bolder offensive operations, where Japanese armor presence would not deter American advances. The October 1943 landing at Bougainville demonstrated how Type 95 intelligence influenced operational planning and tactical execution. Marine commanders positioned anti-tank guns to cover likely armor approach routes from inland positions, creating interlocking fields of fire that ensured Japanese tanks would face multiple threats simultaneously. The defensive scheme accepted that some Japanese armor might penetrate initial defensive lines, but guaranteed that none would reach critical objectives like the beachhead airstrip. Japanese armor attacks at Cape Torokina on November 1st followed predictable patterns that Marine defenders anticipated based on Guadalcanal intelligence. Type 95 tanks advanced with infantry support attempting to overrun defensive positions through shock action and firepower superiority. Marine anti-tank gunners engaged at 600 to 800 yards, achieving frontal penetrations that stopped Japanese tanks well short of friendly positions. The battle lasted less than 30 minutes, with 8 Type 95 tanks destroyed for no American armor losses. The engagement validated every technical assessment conducted on Guadalcanal. Japanese tanks proved unable to withstand American anti-tank weapons at any combat range. The thin armor that might have been adequate against Chinese opposition of the 1930s could not protect against modern American firepower, delivered by well-trained crews using weapons designed specifically for anti-armor missions. Japanese tank crews fought with desperate courage, but lacked equipment capable of surviving even brief exposure to American defensive fires. The Tarawa assault in November 1943 presented a different tactical environment where Japanese armor operated in prepared defensive positions rather than mobile offensive operations. Imperial Navy forces defending Betio Island had emplaced several Type 95 tanks in reinforced positions, supporting beach defenses and airfield fortifications. The static defensive employment negated some Japanese mobility advantages, while doing nothing to compensate for armor protection inadequacies. Naval gunfire and carrier aircraft destroyed most Japanese armor before Marines reached the beach. The Type 95's thin armor provided no protection against 5-inch naval shells or 500-pound bombs delivered by dive bombers. Those tanks that survived preliminary bombardment were systematically eliminated by Marine assault teams using demolition charges, bazookas, and tank-mounted 75mm guns from M4 Sherman medium tanks that accompanied the assault waves. The Tarawa experience reinforced lessons learned on Guadalcanal while revealing additional Type 95 vulnerabilities. Japanese tanks positioned in fortified emplacements became pillboxes rather than mobile weapons, losing their primary tactical advantage while retaining all their protection deficiencies. Marine flamethrower teams found that Type 95 vision systems and ventilation made the tanks vulnerable to flame weapons that forced crew evacuation, even when armor remained technically intact. By December 1943, every Marine division in the Pacific Theater had incorporated Type 95 intelligence into standard operating procedures for anti-tank defense. The tank that had dominated Chinese battlefields throughout the 1930s had become a known quantity that American forces could defeat systematically through application of superior firepower and tactical doctrine built on accurate intelligence about enemy capabilities and limitations. The industrial analysis conducted by War Department Technical Intelligence revealed uncomfortable truths about Japanese manufacturing capabilities that extended beyond armor production into broader assessments of enemy war-making potential. The Type 95 represented the best light tank Japanese industry could produce in meaningful quantities, yet it failed to meet minimum standards for modern armored warfare against opponents equipped with contemporary anti-tank weapons. Japanese steel production limitations constrained armor plate availability and quality throughout the war. Domestic iron ore reserves were inadequate for sustained high-intensity industrial operations, forcing Japan to import raw materials from conquered territories across long, vulnerable supply lines. The armor plate used in Type 95 construction reflected these metallurgical constraints, prioritizing production quantity over ballistic quality. American metallurgists examining Type 95 armor samples found steel compositions that would have been rejected for military applications in United States manufacturing. The face-hardening processes that gave American armor superior ballistic protection were absent from Japanese plate, leaving nominally thick armor with protection values significantly below its measured thickness. Japanese manufacturers lacked the specialized equipment and technical knowledge necessary for advanced armor production, even if raw material supplies had been adequate. The manufacturing quality analysis revealed additional evidence of Japanese industrial limitations. American inspectors found dimensional inconsistencies and finishing quality below United States military procurement standards throughout Type 95 construction. Weld quality varied significantly between components, with some joints showing excellent workmanship, while others exhibited defects that would have failed American quality control inspections. The inconsistency suggested production by multiple facilities with varying capability levels, rather than standardized mass production at dedicated factories. Component interchangeability, a fundamental principle of American mass production, appeared limited in Japanese armor manufacturing. Replacement parts often required hand-fitting for proper installation, creating field maintenance challenges that complicated logistics and reduced operational availability. American armor benefited from precision manufacturing that made components fully interchangeable, allowing rapid field repairs using standardized parts that required no custom fitting. The engine analysis revealed sophisticated design executed with limited manufacturing capabilities. The Mitsubishi air-cooled diesel represented advanced engineering comparable to European designs, but production quality showed evidence of material substitutions and manufacturing compromises that reduced reliability and durability compared to American engines. Japanese manufacturers lacked access to specialized alloys and precision machining equipment that gave American engines superior performance and longevity. These industrial limitations meant Japan could not compete with American armor production in either quantity or quality. United States factories would eventually produce over 49,000 M4 Sherman medium tanks, while Japanese industry struggled to manufacture approximately 2,000 Type 97 Chiha medium tanks. Throughout the entire war, the production disparity reflected fundamental differences in industrial capacity that no amount of Japanese engineering cleverness could overcome. The strategic assessment concluded that Japanese armored forces posed declining threat as the Pacific War progressed. American armor and anti-tank weapon superiority would increase as newer equipment reached combat units, while Japanese forces continued operating obsolete designs that could not be replaced or significantly improved within existing industrial constraints. The Type 95 intelligence had revealed not just a single tank's vulnerabilities, but fundamental weaknesses in Japanese military-industrial capabilities that would prove decisive in determining the war's ultimate outcome. By late 1944, Type 95 intelligence had become so thoroughly integrated into tactical doctrine that American forces engaged Japanese armor with systematic efficiency, born from complete understanding of enemy vulnerabilities. The tank's 12mm frontal armor, 10mm side protection, and vulnerable ammunition storage had become standard knowledge taught to every Marine who might encounter Japanese armor in combat. The psychological transformation was complete. What had once inspired caution now invited aggressive exploitation of documented weaknesses. Japanese industrial limitations became increasingly apparent as the Pacific War progressed. While American factories produced thousands of Sherman tanks with 75mm main guns and armor protection exceeding 75mm in critical areas, Japanese manufacturers struggled to field adequate numbers of obsolete light tanks with 12mm armor and 37mm weapons. The industrial disparity translated directly into battlefield superiority that no amount of Japanese courage or tactical skill could overcome. The Type 95 analysis conducted on Guadalcanal had revealed more than the specifications of a single tank model. It exposed fundamental differences in military-industrial philosophy between American and Japanese approaches to LAMS, warfare. American doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower delivered through superior technology and massive industrial production. Japanese doctrine relied on spiritual superiority and tactical excellence to compensate for material limitations imposed by limited industrial capacity. That philosophical difference determined the Pacific War's ultimate outcome more certainly than any individual battle or campaign. American forces could afford losses and still maintain combat effectiveness through industrial replacement of equipment and personnel. Japanese forces, operating with critically limited resources, could not sustain attrition warfare against opponents who could replace losses faster than they could inflict them. The captured Hargo that Moretti examined in August 1943 became a travelling exhibit throughout the Pacific Theatre, displayed at rear area training facilities, where replacement troops could examine enemy armour firsthand before entering combat. The psychological impact of seeing the actual tank, measuring its thin armour, and understanding its vulnerabilities proved invaluable for building realistic confidence in American troops who would face Japanese armour in subsequent operations. Marine Corps schools at Quantico incorporated full-scale Type 95 mock-ups into anti-tank training programs, allowing student gunners to practice engagement techniques against realistic targets. The training emphasized rapid target acquisition, precise ranging, and aggressive tactics that exploited Japanese armor vulnerabilities. Graduates carried that specialized knowledge into combat units, where it influenced tactical decision-making and defensive planning. By June 1944, as American forces prepared for the Marianas Campaign, Type 95 intelligence had become foundational knowledge for every Marine anti-tank gunner in the Pacific Theater. The tank that had terrorized Chinese forces throughout the 1930s was now understood as a vulnerable target that American weapons could reliably destroy at extended ranges. That knowledge transformation, from fear of the unknown to professional assessment of documented vulnerabilities, represented one of the Pacific War's most significant intelligence achievements. The final irony emerged in post-war analysis when captured Japanese documents revealed that Imperial Army commanders had recognized the Type 95's obsolescence by 1941, but lacked industrial capacity to replace it with more capable designs. Japanese tank crews went into battle knowing their armor was inadequate against American weapons, fighting anyway because doctrine and national necessity demanded it. Their courage couldn't overcome the fundamental mathematical reality that 12mm armor couldn't stop 37mm armor-piercing rounds regardless of crew skill or tactical employment. Gunnery Sergeant Frank Moretti survived the Pacific War and returned to Pennsylvania's steel mills in 1946. He occasionally thought about the Type 95 he had examined on Guadalcanal, remembering how the thin armor had revealed Japanese industrial limitations more clearly than any intelligence estimate or strategic analysis. The tank had been well designed for a different war, a colonial conflict against opponents lacking modern weapons. But the Pacific War had demanded capabilities that Japanese industry could not provide, and Japanese courage could not replace. The Type 95 Hargo remained in Japanese service throughout the war, despite its documented inadequacies, because Imperial forces had nothing better to field in adequate numbers. American forces encountered the obsolete light tanks from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, destroying them with consistent efficiency that validated the intelligence analysis conducted in August 1943. The tank that should have been replaced in the early 1940s soldiered on through Japan's final desperate battles, carrying brave crews in vehicles that couldn't protect them against weapons that couldn't miss. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.